Well, today I want to talk to you about something I call CPR. You know what CPR is, don't you? Did you know it applies to the church and to us as individuals? Well, for you. And the answers on this quiz, let me say this first. We practice respect. As Christians, we practice respect. We may not accept another person's point of view or, in this case, their answer, but we will respect that and hold that within our hearts. So I want you, as much as you're able, to give your answer, and the answers will be 1, 2, 3, 4 to these questions. So 1 will be no way. I'm going to make some statements. If you think it's no way, 1. I don't believe it's true. Well, maybe it could be true. I know it's true, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, here's your practice question. Are you ready for this? Roses are red and violets are blue. No way. I don't believe it's true. Maybe it could be true, or I know it's true. 4. Good. Okay. Are you ready for the next question? God could have finished creating the universe and everything in it in 6 days. Now, I'm not asking, did he? I'm saying he could have. God could have created the universe and everything in it in 6 days. No way. I don't believe it's true. Maybe it could be true. I know it's true. I got some folks, you're kind of dropping out on me. Okay, how about, here's another one. God could get rid of all the wars, poverty, abuse, hunger, and everything negative in the world. God could get rid of all the wars, poverty, abuse, hunger, everything negative in the world. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 1, okay. 3, God created me to be more than I am right now. God created me to be more than I am right now. And God can do anything. God can do anything. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, good. No right or wrong answers. Just trying to get a sense of where we are. I do want to say that Jesus has told us quite plainly, quite clearly, all things are possible with God. 2 things actually are impossible for God, actually. 1 is God cannot lie. God cannot lie. And the others, and that's in Scripture as well, in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Also, God can't fail. Right? God can't lie and God can't fail. And I forgot to tell you this. I know that what we do on Sunday mornings, what we do in worship, is meant for the entirety of the week. If you think about it, we come here to get our blast, to get through the week until we come back together. And I spent a lot of time putting this message together. I know Pastor Doug spends a lot of time putting his messages together, and we don't do that as some, ridiculous exercise. So what I want you to do is get a pen, a pencil, and piece of paper or something. You've got your bulletin. Some of you are looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm absolutely serious about this. I drove 7 hours. Am I making you feel guilty yet, right? Okay, pen, pencil, take some notes. Take some notes here, all right? So, God can't fail, right? God can't fail, and God cannot lie, and all things are possible with God. Now, it's not that God can't do anything. It's our own inabilities that get in the way. And I realized a couple of days ago as I was working on this message, my desk is in my office, is where our piano is. I could say my piano's in my office, and I looked at the top of my piano and I realized that my piano, what's on my piano, is actually a reminder of that God can do all things. And any time into the future that I'm doubting that, I'm just going to go in there and look at the top of my piano. Anytime that I'm not sure that I can finish a project that I should be finishing or working on a project, I'm just going to look at my piano. And that's the top of my piano. It has some pieces up there. Well, I just said that it's not about God, it's about our own inabilities. And one of those inabilities is what we just mentioned to the children, and that's conceive. That when it comes to our thinking or that something can be done, it's really about whether or not we can conceive it can be done. On the top of this, that's not a good picture, is it? Anyways, on the top right, there is an hourglass on my piano. When I was in, I don't know exactly when, I probably would have been in about 5th or 6th grade, I had this dream. And at that point, my family was no longer in church. My mother died when I was in 4th grade, and my dad said, there is no God. Professed atheism from there on out. Said there is no God. So we're now in this household where there is no God. And when I had this dream, we would have been about 2 years into that, hadn't been in church. But in my dream, I was in my 3rd grade Sunday school classroom, and there was this upright piano in that room, and it had been painted green, like churchy green that you find in some old churches. And over on the side was the table, the low table where we children would sit to do our Sunday school lessons, work through leaflets. Those of you who've grown up in church may know what I'm talking about. And that was there. So only the piano, only the table is there, and this big hourglass on the right-hand side of the piano. And there's sand running through the hourglass. And I ask, I don't think out loud, what happens when the sand runs out? There's nobody in that room. What happens, though, when the sand runs out? And something told me, again, I didn't hear it audibly, but something told me when that sand runs out, God is dead. And I said, how could God be dead? And I said, what do we do about that? And they said, you have to go and tell everyone about God. I realized probably, oh my goodness, I would have been in my 30s, that was God's call upon my life to be a minister, to go and tell everyone, to be an evangelist. Somehow I knew that when I was 12 or 13 years old, when they start to ask you in school, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I want to be a minister. I'm going to be a minister. And you know what my guidance counselor told me? You can't be a minister. You're a girl and you don't go to church. You're a girl and you don't go to church. See, she could not conceive that I could be anything. She could not conceive that you can be anything. She could not conceive that she could be anything. And so that hourglass reminds me, I purposely sat it on that piano where it was in that dream to remind me that God can do anything. On that piano as well is an angel. I think it's a porcelain angel. Makes music, and it's there to remind me of my nanny. I didn't have grandparents, but when I was in my early 20s, this woman, Nanny, I had just gone back to church. I was a baby Christian, had just made my profession of faith, and Nanny took me under her wing. She was in her late 70s, and Nanny had these amazing experiences. And she told me about one of them where she was in the hospital and angels flew over her bed. That sounds a little fantastic, doesn't it? But she could conceive of angels. I think it sounds fantastic because not all of us can conceive that there really are angels. And she said, but do you know what people ask me when I tell them about those angels? They ask me if they had shoes on. She says, now, do you really think you look at angels' feet to see if they have shoes on when they fly over your bed? Now, here's a real sticker for me. She went and told our pastor about the experience, and this is what he told her. He said, you know, as you get older, sometimes you have episodes like that, and they can be a sign of dementia, and you should talk to your doctor. Is it possible? Quiz number 2, here we go. So the answers to quiz number 2 are pretty straightforward. Never, a year ago, last month, last week, and yesterday. All right? Have you, no, I have to ask it this way. Have you seen or witnessed God do something in the past? Oh, never is the first one. Never seen God do something. Year ago, you did. In the last month, in the last week, yesterday. Sue, I know that Pastor Doug likes to pick on you. I'm following his lead. So, did I see a 4 or a 5? 4 or 5. A 4. Could you tell me where you saw God? Would you? Beautiful. I'm not sure if you could hear her that you see God, you're able to see if you look around and you realize that it's not what man has done or woman has done, you just know it's what God has done. And that brings us to our second common inability, which is perceive. Perceiving is noticing, it's seeing something and knowing that God somehow is in that. And generally, to be able to perceive something, you've got to conceive that God is capable of doing that. One of the pieces that's on my piano, I got to pull you for 2 here, is a little blue piece of paper that has musical notes and a 4/4 time that was written by our grandson, Ethan, I don't know how many years ago. This is a song. And he's asked me several times to play his song. I can't play his song. That's not, I could tap out his song, right? I have no idea. I do not perceive it as a song, but I have come to realize, it's not I've come to realize, this kiddo has an incredible gift of music. And he can listen to something and play it, and he'll get stuck, and he'll say, Grandma, will you help me play the song? And I tell him, I need music. I can sight read, but I can't do that because he has a gift and he perceives that. You have to perceive. I had to conceive that God could do that in him to be able to perceive it. Now, it's interesting how perceiving can play into our lives. Photos of 2 of my, 2 sets of friends. He's trying to read my notes. I don't think it's working. Up top is our friend Leslie, who's with Ethan when, oh my goodness, he must have been about 5 then. We hadn't lived there very long in Columbia. Oh my goodness, he'd be 3 or 4. And then friends from Yates Center, Kansas, where I pastored, Roberta, and I'm in the middle, and Jana Goebel on the other side. Leslie on the top was my administrative assistant. Actually, she became my administrator when we moved to Missouri. I served for 9 years as a denominational official. I was like a translation bishop. So I was a bishop within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We just don't have bishops. We call them regional area ministers. And Leslie came to us. Leslie has a master's degree in public administration. That woman could have been out making all kinds of money, and yet she came and made no money with us. And we figured when we hired her, and we were desperate, we figured when we hired her that she might stay with us for maybe 6 months. We'd be lucky if she stayed with us for a year, but she stayed with us for 9 years until our office closed. The greater denomination took in up our layer of denomination. And so until that point, Leslie had gone from being our administrative assistant to being our administrator, and she could conceive, when she came, she could conceive that God could do anything, but she wasn't perceiving exactly what God was doing in her. That she needed to come to that place where she could say, wow, that's right, and look at the ministry. We were able to speak that into her. And then when a new director for what was then the Mid-America Center for Ministry, when the Mid-America Center for Ministry was looking for a new director, Bill, my husband, who's up in the balcony, and I looked at each other at dinner with Leslie and her mom and said, it's her. We knew it was her, that she was to be that new director. She said, no way. We said, yes way. And that woman, she is the director of what now is not just Mid-America Center for Ministry. She is the director of the Center for Ministry and Lay Training at Phillips Theological Seminary. When she was able to perceive that she could do that, she followed through on that. Now, that's a positive example of perceiving, but then there is the not so positive. And that's when we can't perceive God in the midst of something. And when we get to that place, a lot of us, like my dad did, blame God because God has not answered our prayers. My friends, Roberta and Jana. Roberta was, as I think I said, my administrative assistant at the Yates Center Christian Church. And a few years ago, she was in her late 50s. This has probably been about 5-6 years ago. She got a cyst or something on her ankle, and the doctor said, oh, it's no big deal. And after about 6 months, it was getting bigger, and the doctor said, maybe you should go to the ER. And that finally put her into a hospital where she spent the next 5 or so years in and out of the hospital until she died 2 years ago. 60 years old. 60 years old. And don't you know there are a lot of questions, particularly from her 2 daughters, and there will be from her grandsons when they grow enough to question and to say, God, where the heck were you? Is there really a God? If there's a God, can that God really do anything? It gets a little confusing to us when we don't see God. It makes us question our conceptions, or it puts our conceptions, our conceiving into jeopardy, really. But I want to say that it appears that we're just not noticing how God is acting. Scott Peck wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled, and I can't remember the exact words of the opening, but this is my translation of it. Life sucks. You know, right? And we live in a fallen world. That means that we live in a world that is not as God intended it to be. Go back, read the beginning of the Bible. We call it the Old Testament, and you get Genesis is the first book. Just read the first 2 chapters, and particularly that second chapter, and you're going to see how God intends the world to be. And if you venture into chapter 3, you'll see how it all fell apart, and that is the world that we live in. We live in a fallen world. We live in a place where there is disease and famine and poverty and hunger, and people are dying. People are dying. We are living with consequences, inheriting consequences of actions and inactions, some of which are ours and some of which we have inherited and have been piling on for eons and eons. This next picture is of a picture of a woman named Kim Fight drew. Kim was an acupuncturist, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. In fact, I bought this picture at a fundraiser because she didn't have insurance, and they were selling some of her art to raise money to help with her medical expenses. And that question about, why is God not healing Kim? She lived a good life. She lived a right life. She did all the right things, right, health-wise, et cetera, et cetera. Why would she get leukemia? I'm past asking why. I just take things where they are and say, here's where it is. Where are we supposed to be, and how are we going to get there? Kim died, and people said, where was God? God did not answer our prayers. But I realized, I've perceived that God answered Kim's prayer. Kim had an apprentice acupuncturist. Her name's Mary Cruz. And Kim walked with Mary for about 5 years to apprentice Mary into becoming an acupuncturist. Mary may be the last acupuncturist in the country, at least in Missouri, that has come through an apprentice program rather than going to school, because so many people fail the licensing tests. Mary sailed through. Kim's prayer was to see Mary get her licensure and be an acupuncturist. And Mary got notice of both her state and federal licensing, and Kim died the next day. Can you perceive God at work there? Can you see? Underneath, at the bottom, not underneath, at the bottom of my hourglass sits 2 diamond-shaped frames. Doug, are we not able to move the slides? We're having trouble with slides. There they are. Those frames hold an AA coin and an NA coin. I have been sober for 16 years, and I have been abstinent from drug abuse for 37 years. I say that because anyone who's in recovery can tell you that it is not you who does it. It is God. It is God, and we have to let him do it for us. We have to let him do it in us. We have to do service to keep it, to let God work through us. We have to receive what God wants to do for us, in us, and through us. We have to not only conceive that it's possible. I don't know how many people I've seen in 12-step rooms who walk into them and say, not me, not me. God would never do that for me. I'm not even sure if there is a God. They can't conceive, and then they begin to perceive and hear what God is doing in people's lives. And then they come to want it and receive it for themselves. See, they have CPR. They can conceive and perceive and receive. You cannot be sober or abstinent or clean if you do not know, have practiced CPR. Now, CPR is not just for individuals. It's also for the church. Somewhere up there is a slide of Bellevue, Washington. And down in the corner of that slide is a little circle. Bellevue is incredible. At one point, it was the highest, one of the wealthiest places in the United States. Bill Gates lives in a portion of Bellevue. And down in this little corner, there is a church, well, there was a church called Bellevue Christian Church, and it was so close. We've got a map somewhere that it's close to water and beaches, and the church sat in this neighborhood. And across the street and around us, people were buying homes that had been built in the 50s, and this is 2000 to 2004. People are buying homes for $500,000 to $1 million, tearing them down to build $3, $4, and $5 million homes. So new people are moving in all the time, and there we are, their neighborhood. We could be their neighborhood church. And if you look closely, there's the school 2 blocks from the church. The Beaux-Arts Village is a subdivision, if you will. I could walk down 5 or 6 blocks and be on the Enitai Beach. I could go across about 8 blocks through some neighborhoods and be at the Chesterfield Beach Park. It was amazing. And the church had great facilities. In fact, I have to say, this sanctuary reminds me a little of the Bellevue with the top here. And the windows especially. And being so close, so we had a great sanctuary, and we had great, you can't really see it, but educational wing to reach the children, to provide ministry to our neighbors, and the neighborhood children. At one point, the church had a way of blaming pastors, and when I got there, the church had been there for about 42 years, and they had blamed all 5 of their 6 pastors for why the church was not doing well. It was the pastor's fault in every single case. And the church was in a pretty rocky place at that time. And we had the opportunity to add another staff person. In fact, they were bringing, we were going to merge a church in with ours, and this church was going to bring all but about $20,000 of his salary, which meant that Bellevue Christian had to make a commitment of $20,000. So we sat in a board meeting, and this one man, John, said, "It will take a miracle to raise that kind of money." I said, "Well, my God does miracles." I said, "So are we willing to test him? The money doesn't come, but are you willing to test him?" We doubled. We didn't take $20,000. We took in $40,000. And I made sure that every Sunday from the pulpit, we were always celebrating what we were seeing God doing. We wanted to make sure people with us could perceive what God could do and what God was doing. And in that board meeting, the next board meeting, I said, "John, look what they've done. Look what we've done. Look what God did." Well, about 6 months later, there was something else too that we needed monies for. We were at the board, and John said it would be a miracle if that happened. I said, "John, do you not remember the miracle that God did in our midst?" He said, "God would never do another one for us." That church closed within about 4 years after we left. And do you want to know what they do with the building now? It's office space. I don't know if you can see. It says office space. It's on a leasing site. It's where I got that picture. and I love the sign that's on that they had out there. It's the only sign at Bellevue Christian that I could find. Only sign, and it says, "Looking for a sign from God? This may be it. This may be it." And do you ever wonder what happens to the signs, where the signs go? Do you reckon it came here? God's bringing you a sign. Maybe it's your sign. I want to come back to us personally, not just on the church. And I'm in here preaching this, so I'm talking to you, church, but I'm also talking to churches. I've said this in over, I don't know, at least 100 churches. This next picture is my hosta bed at the house. And on 2 occasions, it happened this year, I was out there and I could smell tomatoes. Have you ever sniffed do you know what a tomato plant smells like, right? I could smell tomatoes. Now, we do not garden because we don't garden. But I couldn't, I wasn't sure. So I would check every now and again, and a tomato plant was out there growing, and it got big enough that I put a tomato cage over it. And I've spared you this last picture. This tomato plant is everywhere, and we got tomatoes. Now, the last time this happened was a few years ago, and I was leading a council retreat for a church in Iowa, and I was telling about how God can do anything, and all we have to do is notice what God is doing. Can we conceive it? Can we perceive it? Were they going to receive that word? And I said, God gave me these tomatoes. When people said, that is crazy, and I said, but they were cherry tomatoes. I want beefsteak tomatoes. And so I am praying for beefsteak tomatoes. Well, one of the women in that meeting happened to be an extension agent, and she went on to explain to me why I would never get beefsteak tomatoes off a startup tomato plant. But then this awesome man said, if she wants beefsteak tomatoes and she asks God for it, He's going to give her beefsteak tomatoes. He believes it. He believes it. Now, the scripture we read, Jesus said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Now, I don't have a picture of a mountain that's been moved, although in earthquakes you can see mountains move. But I did hear just a week or so ago about a school in China that they needed to move out of the way. 85-year-old school that they needed to move out of the way to build a commerce center. And instead of tearing it down, this is what they did.
各大小学评议以后，我们会进行一个全面性的招生工作。将来我们计划呢，就作为一个文化教育、非遗保护、文创互化的一个计划的作用，希望对老建筑给予新的生命力。
It's not a mountain. Could have been a mountain to some of us, though. Who'd have ever believed? But somebody could conceive that it could be done. And somebody had perceived somewhere the mechanisms that might make it happen. And he was able to receive all that, those skills, other people's experience and technologies. She was able to receive it and move a mountain of a building. So here's your final quiz. Are you ready? Can you conceive what God can do? Can you conceive that God can do anything? Perceive, will you acquire the skills that are necessary to perceive what God is doing in, for, around, and through you? Will you perceive? And will you receive what God is and wants to do for, in, and through you? Will you practice CPR? Because people are dying. And you know as well as I do that people will not live who would otherwise live if they did not practice CPR. Are you willing to do what it takes to learn how and practice CPR in your life and in the life of your church? Will you continue to grow in being able to conceive? Will you perceive? And will you receive? Even if your faith is the size of a mustard seed, will you trust that God can and does move mountains? Amen.